Hello and welcome to Off the Record. I'm Rebecca Larson.
And I'm Amy McElroy.
And you know what? Hi, Amy. I just have to say hi real quick. It doesn't feel right without saying hi. It's
Hello.
it's Sunday and we're together again.
Yes.
And last week was such a fun episode. We talked about what if Mary Queen of Scots had not been executed by
Mhm.
Elizabeth the First. And I'm curious, can you let us know what our listeners saying about that episode?
Yeah, I've actually got some comments. So
Mhm.
one of them isn't specifically linked to the Mary Queen of Scots episode, but I love this comment. So Sherry says, these videos make me so happy. It's a perfect Sunday morning, a cup of coffee, my sweet dog, and learning history with two of my absolute favorites. I feel like having a morning coffee clutch.
Oh,
I
cute.
love that. I think
Yeah.
that's lovely. But with the actual episode, so there's some questions that arise from it, which we love.
Yeah.
So Douglas asks if the execution of Mary Queen of Scots was not a precedent, would Charles the First have been executed?
Yeah.
So that's something that we can think about.
Yeah.
And then Cindy says, thank you, ladies. You both had some really good what ifs today. So thank you, Cindy. And there's some more suggestions. For instance, what if Catherine Parr had lived longer?
Yeah.
There's Heather who just says, I love the topic already. So thank you, Heather. And then this one's quite interesting. So Charlotte says, thank you, that was great. I really think another nail in Mary's coffin was the fact that she had managed to have an heir and she didn't have to deal with a husband who might dominate. Well, not anymore. But
Mm.
then the fact that through association with Bothwell was implicated in the Darnley murder was her downfall. But I think Elizabeth might have been a bit jealous that Mary had managed to have a son and her husband was gone. She unfortunately ended up with someone worse. Jean Gordon dodged that one. A
Yeah.
good what if might be what would have happened to the Bothwell twins had they survived.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, that's an interesting
Yeah.
one. And then we have Caroline, who says, I really feel for Mary. She had no chance after Francis died. Really, what would have been the best case scenario would be if she married Charles when she was older, although I understand why that didn't happen. And since Charles went off in the deep end and didn't last long anyway, she would have been in the same position, but later. She was only safe on the continent, and the second she got back to Scotland, she was kind of doomed. And
Yeah.
then this one, I need to know what game this is. So Ms. JT says, if she wasn't executed, I would have lost a game I played as a child. We would sing Mary Queen of Scots got her head chopped off as two girls flipped over a third.
You
I
know
don't
what?
know this game.
I don't either.
No, but I
I,
need to know.
you know what it reminded me of as a kid, and I don't know if you guys ever did this, and it's kind of weird now that I think about it. Like, dandelions, the little yellow weed flower that
Yes.
grows on lawns. We used to always take them and put our thumb under the head of it and say, "Mama had a baby and its head popped off," and then we'd pop up. I don't know why we sang that. Honestly, I don't even know where
It's a
that
bit
could.
morbid.
Why? If you guys can see me right now, my face is bright red because it never meant anything. Like it's just words that you said, and you never thought about it as a kid. And I was like, why were we talking about a ba Okay, anyway, I just that game that she mentioned for some reason triggered that memory in me.
Yeah, I think Miss JT needs to tell us more about this game because
Yeah,
I don't know this game. So please tell
yeah.
us more.
Oh my gosh, those are some great comments.
Yes,
So you
I
guys
do
just
love reading the comments.
they are really fun, and
Yeah.
it's great. So if you guys have comments in the future too, just know Amy might be reading them on the air.
Yes.
All right, so let's get to today's topic. This one is not Tudor, but we can somehow attach it to the Tudors, which is fine
Mhm.
because honestly, this podcast, Tudors Dynasty and Beyond, is not just Tudors. And off the record, we're going to talk about whatever we want too, because it's off the
Yes.
record.
Yeah.
My
We don't
first,
care.
we don't. My first love was The Wars of the Roses. Okay. I got into Philippa Gregory's books about that time period, and that's what really got me interested, especially in Edward the Fourth and Elizabeth Woodville and Margaret Beaufort and all of that stuff. And so today, our topic, and I have to remember exactly how we were titling it. What if Richard, third Duke of York, had not died? Let's say, what if Richard, Duke of York, had not been murdered? Is that
Yes.
is that a little bit? I think that maybe that's how we should frame this. What if he hadn't been
What if
murdered?
Richard, Duke of York, didn't have his head stuck on a spike at
Yeah,
Micklegate?
yeah. What if?
Yeah.
So, for those maybe who are unfamiliar with who this guy is, I mean, I think we maybe have hinted a little bit, but why don't you give us a little bit of background on who Richard was?
So Richard, Duke of York, essentially was the father of Edward the Fourth. But to give a bit more background, he actually had a very strong claim to the throne. So both of his parents, so his dad was Richard, Earl of Cambridge, and his mom was a lady called Anne Mortimer. So anybody that knows the Mortimers of
Right.
Welsh Marches, that's the ones. So his dad was descended from Edmund of Langley, who was the first Duke of York. And he was the fourth surviving son of Edward III. So obviously you've got that link to Edward III there. But on his mother's side, she was the great granddaughter of Lionel, Duke of Clarence. So, the Duke of Clarence bit that goes down the line a bit. And he was the second son of Edward III. And just to complicate it even more, for anybody that doesn't know, Henry the Sixth, the Lancastrian line, was descended from John of Gaunt, who was the third surviving son of Edward the Third. So just between these two men, Henry the Sixth and Richard, Duke of York, we essentially cover sons two to four of Edward the Third. So yes, Richard, Duke of York, was quite strongly linked. His parents died when he was fairly young. He was a ward of the crown. He was married when he was young to Cecily Neville. So Neville family are in there as well.
Of
Um,
course.
and had lots and lots of children. So there are those that most people will know about, the ones that survived into adulthood. So we've got Edward the Fourth, who was the eldest son, or who would become Edward of York, Edward the Fourth, I should say. Then we have Edmund, who was the Earl of Rutland, Elizabeth, who was Duchess of Suffolk, um, Margaret, who became Duchess of Burgundy, who caused a load of problems for Henry Tudor later on.
Yeah.
Um, George, who was Duke of Clarence and died in a wine barrel, allegedly.
Yep.
And then finally, Richard of Gloucester, who would become Richard III. So lots of children there.
Yes. Yeah.
He did have quite a good career, really. So he was sent to France for initially a 12-month term to look after the English forces over there. He was then sent back on a 5-year term, ended up paying for a lot of it himself. So the crown wasn't very forthcoming with money then. And then when he did come back after those 5 years, the French term after that actually went to Edmund Beaufort, who was the second Duke of Somerset.
Okay.
And there was a bit of rivalry between those two. And York was actually sent to Ireland, so he was given the lieutenancy in Ireland. But essentially, he ended up with so much debt from the crown that, it's bound to get you back up if you're owed thousands of pounds, which would equate to millions today.
Right.
So, yes, he wasn't a happy bunny. And, Somerset was blamed for some failings in France. So I think that was the start of things, shall we say, of where there became some disagreements, if we put it politely,
Yeah, disagree.
between the two men and obviously the power struggle for,
Yeah.
I suppose, the throne, if you want to put it bluntly. But I don't think that was in anybody's head at that time.
No. Well, and all of the trouble starts kind of with Henry the Sixth and his mental illness, doesn't it?
Yeah. So Henry the Sixth, and I think even today we don't know what actually happened to him. I suppose we could, we can guess.
Hmm.
But I'm definitely not a doctor, so I couldn't tell you what was wrong with him. But he was unresponsive. That happened in 1434, I believe, 1454, sorry. And at that point, Margaret of Henry VI was married to Margaret of Anjou. And I think that's where the trouble really started to come to a head because obviously you've got Margaret on one hand that really just wants her husband to, I suppose, wake up is the only way you can
Yeah.
say it.
Rule.
Yeah, and act as a king, but he's not in any fit state to do so. She's got Somerset on one side, who was her man, so to speak. And then you've got Richard, Duke of York, on the other side that is thinking, hang on, someone needs to rule the country here. Somebody needs to look after it. And I would still say, I know that you can argue that, one or the other was in the wrong. I personally don't think either of them. I don't think Margaret or Richard were in the wrong. I think both of them were trying to protect the country, but just in different ways. I think Margaret was obviously thinking, this is my husband and her son. She had a small baby at that point. Child hadn't been recognised because Henry was in a stupor.
Oh, right,
So
right.
what do you do? Like, she's trying to argue that she should be in place, or at least Somerset. Richard, Duke of York, is arguing it should be him. And ultimately, it boils down to Parliament and the nobility. And, it's up to them at the end of the day. That could have gone either way.
Yeah.
They went on the side of Richard, Duke of York. He was appointed protector of the realm. But obviously, Henry wasn't completely down and out, and he did wake up. So I think at that point, you get this seesaw of Henry's episodes. Richard gets his power. I suppose yeah, that is, I suppose, the correct way of saying it, but he's appointed. And then Henry wakes up and he's back on the down and Somerset's on the up and
Yeah.
spending time in and out the tower, depending on who's in power. And it's not a great time for Somerset either, but I'm not a fan of him. So probably shouldn't say that to anybody that might be a fan. Apologies.
Please. I always say I'm not a fan of Elizabeth the First, and people don't like that either. So it's okay to have those opinions. So we're kind of talking about the Act of Accord, which named Richard heir to Henry the Sixth, sidesteps Henry the Sixth's son
Yeah.
altogether and just goes right to Richard, which to me just blows my mind.
And
Um,
it's not even just him, it's Richard and his heirs. So,
yeah,
the the age difference between him and Henry, realistically, did Richard have a chance of being on the throne? Or was he okay with the fact that he probably wouldn't get a chance, but his sons would?
yeah.
So, you
Yeah,
know,
and this is kind of what we're going to be looking at today. So, for any of these scenarios that we're going to be talking about today, this would probably make Henry the Sixth dead at some point. How he died, I don't. I was like,
well,
we
let's
could,
face it, they all died at some point, or they'd still be with us now. So,
right. So, let's say he died not long after the Act of Accord was passed. Maybe that's the best way to look at it. He just mysteriously or naturally died. We don't know
yeah.
because this is the alternate reality. we're
Yeah,
looking at today.
massively. We're not
Yeah.
playing with the truth here.
Yeah. No, no. So I came up with some scenarios, and I hope you're okay going through these with me because I thought there's a bunch of different scenarios that could play out.
Yeah,
One,
let's do it. Why
okay.
not?
What kind
Doing
of
our own, what are they called? Adventure
choose
storybook. Choose
choose
your own adventure. There we go.
I did say so. I saw somebody had commented that they remembered those books. So they must be American. And there was somebody else in the UK who said there was
The
something similar.
Goosebumps one. Yes, I need
Yeah.
to find it.
Yeah. So those are fun. You guys, we're going to keep bringing up Choose Your Own Adventure. I feel like now I need to make a t-shirt. I wonder if I can do that, if it's
I think
trademarked
we
or
need to
anything.
make a book, to be honest. Choose your own adventure Tudor book. It might be the biggest book ever,
I
but
know. Ooh.
it's
I
quite
feel
fun.
like maybe I could do it if it's written for kids. Then it wouldn't be so
Yeah,
many pages.
just pictures.
I know, I know. You're still writing books. I'm trying to finish one book, and you're on your 20th. So, oh, okay. So anyway, let's start with some scenarios here and look at. Okay, so scenario one, we're gonna look at Richard. We're just gonna call him Richard, okay? And I don't want you to get confused with his son Richard because we're just talking about Richard, Duke of York. Richard is the reluctant, law-bound king. Okay, so how does this happen? All right, you guys, I'm going to go through my list here. Listen,
Okay.
listen carefully. Amy,
Okay.
you can
Do,
jump
do I
in.
need do I need to take notes?
No, no. I mean, you can if you want, but you don't need to. Okay, so how does this happen? Well, Richard survives Wakefield. Obviously, that's the most important part.
Hmm.
The Lancastrian resistance weakens. Henry the Sixth, well, in this situation, he's quietly set aside. Maybe he goes to has monastic confinement or some type of permanent seclusion. So in this case, Henry the Sixth is alive. We didn't kill him off. And in 1461, Parliament crowns Richard, Duke of York, as king. So
Okay.
as the reluctant, law-bound king, what does his reign look like? Well, he's going to rule as Richard III, but not the Richard III that we know. This is going to be a totally different Richard
Mhm.
III. So
Yeah.
imagine that. Um, this emphasizes legitimacy, law, and continuity. Okay, so we're just going to keep things moving. It keeps many Lancastrian officials to avoid backlash, and there's no sweeping purges. So the key outcomes from this type of rule would be fewer executions early
Mhm.
on. Margaret of Anjou becomes isolated abroad, maybe. Her son, their son, Edward of Lancaster, grows up in exile. People aren't rallying behind him. The support is all behind Richard III now, this new Richard III. Edward IV is now heir to his father, and he is under control. His dad's got him under control. He's like, "Look, buddy, you're next, but hold your horses." And why do you think this works? I mean, if he comes into it with this like law and order, this is the law. I'm doing it because it's the law. Um, do you think that a rule like that could still get fractured at all? I mean,
I think there's gonna be some factions that still would have supported either trying to force Henry VI back on the throne, so taking him out of wherever he was, um, you know, putting him as a puppet, so to speak, or those that would have kind of forgotten about him,
yeah,
but maybe rallied behind his son once he was older. So I think the early years in that scenario would have been quite peaceful for Richard, Duke of York, because from what you've just said, he keeps the Lancastrians in the roles kind of thing. He does what he can for the country and the public. He's not, making land grabs or anything like that. He's sticking to basically keeping the country running, which is obviously what Henry VI wasn't doing when he was unwell. And I think, during the times that he was acting as protector, he didn't do a bad job. So if that is anything to go by, I think at least the early years when Henry VI's son is a baby, nobody's going to support a baby. So, the nobility are not going to back that. So they might have bided their time. But I think by that point, you've got a situation where everybody would have known Edward by that point. He'd have, been around the court, the nobility would know him. We all know that Edward was meant to be the tall, strong, athletic kind of guy.
Handsome.
Bit
Don't
like,
forget handsome.
yep, that one as well, where Max Irons plays him. Good choice. Moving on swiftly. Uh,
He's going to
uh,
become the new Henry Cavill, I think, for
yeah.
off the record. Max
So
Irons.
you've got that situation where I think, the nobility would have come to know somebody that they can support. And then I think if you've got, whether they initially thought that we can't support them, like it's not right. I think if you spend years around somebody, as long as they don't do something
Yeah.
to annoy you or upset you or take your land or your money, whatever, are you really then going to cause civil war to support a child that's been living in exile for 15 years and
Yeah.
you don't know them from Adam? You don't know what kind of king they would be, whereas you've gotten to know Edward. So I think even if in the initial stages they were thinking, let's just keep quiet for now, wait for other Edward, to grow up a bit, then we'll back him. I think that would have changed over time to become there's actually nothing wrong with Richard III, new Richard III, and his son. So maybe we should just leave them in exile.
Yeah.
So I think it probably would have been quite a peaceful reign. I think you'd always have skirmishes. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's England after all, but I think it would be relatively peaceful in
Yeah.
comparison to what we ended up with anyway.
Yeah, because it was quite a turbulent time in English history.
Yes.
There's a reason why they called it like the Cousins Wars. Like it was cousins fighting cousins. I can't even imagine what it would have been
Yeah.
like to live during that time. Okay, so that was good. Thank you for all of that information. You are definitely more versed on this topic than I am. I was listening to you and I was like, wow, she actually knows a lot more about this than I do. I feel like all I know is from historical fiction. So, so whatever I say, just take with a grain of salt. Okay, scenario number 2. Now we're looking at the crown with conditions. So,
Mm,
um, Richard accepts the crown with limitations.
okay.
Parliament imposes guardrails to prevent civil war. Henry VI remains alive. So at the beginning, when I said Henry VI was dead, I lied. So just so you know, I'm a liar. I just lied to your faces. Um, Henry VI remains alive, but he's powerless. Okay.
Okay.
So what changes? It's a stronger role for Parliament in governance. Succession clarified early, so now we know. Okay, well, Parliament's like, okay, we got Richard, and then his sons follow. Reduced reliance on factional favorites. This is really going into it here. But the long-term consequences. Earlier evolution towards a constitutional monarchy. I find this interesting. Kingship becomes less personal, more institutional. So that sounds like more modern day, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And nobles tolerate Richard because he limits himself. So this scenario kind of rewrites English political culture. Like I was just saying, kind of seems similar
Yeah.
today. The Wars of the Roses becomes like a legal transition, not dynastic slaughter, kind of like what it was.
I
So,
like that phrase, dynastic slaughter.
so the risk in this, in the crown with conditions, is weak kingship. It could invite future instability and
Hmm.
sets a precedent for future monarchs basically to resent that now that they've lost all of this power that their predecessors probably had. So, do you think that England would have been ready for a king with rules, or do you think that was just kind of a fantasy during that time?
I don't know, because obviously you've got like John, King John and the Magna Carta and things like that. So I think there'd already been attempts to restrain the power of the monarch in certain situations. Don't think anybody else was going to be ever as bad as John, but moving on. So I don't know. I think they probably would have been ready, but at the same time, I think England then would have been in a situation where, the Wars of the Roses proved it that the nobility had a lot of power, a lot.
Hmm.
They had a lot of money. And if you're a king that is extremely limited in your powers, I would say you could easily be replaced or easily
Yeah.
maneuvered into a situation that you might not necessarily agree with. All it would take is one of those nobles that has a lot more money and can call upon a large amount of men to back you into a corner.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to restrict a king, you also need to restrict the nobility. Otherwise, I don't think there's any balance and it wouldn't work. But where's Margaret in this situation? Is she still around? Or is she
Gosh, that's a good question.
gone?
What do you think?
Because I think that would sway some of the nobility. If she's not there, then I think Richard's got more chance of having a successful reign. If she's around, I think you'll always have those nobles that will support her cause, or at least her
Yeah.
son's cause. So again, I think it'd boil down to the power of the nobility and money. And yes, Richard of York had powerful friends,
Hmm.
i.e., Kingmaker, you know.
Yeah.
But depending on how he restricted people's roles or whatever their positions, that power could easily be shifted. So I don't know. I think you need to balance both. I think you need to balance the king and the nobility. Otherwise, you just tip it from one way to the other. And I
Yeah.
don't think either of that works. I think there has to be balance.
I think you brought up a good point with Margaret because I was looking back at what was up with Henry VI in this scenario, and he remained alive but was powerless. I do think she would have probably stayed by his side. Why would she go into exile if he was still alive?
Mm.
And she probably would have kept trying to get the throne back for him or
Yeah, and I
change.
don't like I know people that will argue that Margaret wanted to be queen and this, that, and the other. Of course she did. She married a king. Like, you don't marry, or especially a king like Henry VI to, just for the hell of it, do you? But I also don't think that was her primary thing. I think it was her son, her son's birthright.
Yeah.
That any mother's going to fight for that. I don't think you could sit there and go, oh, okay, like, don't worry about it. My,
Yeah.
my son is the son of a king, but it's okay. I accept that I'm going to be shoved into a little house with no power, lose all half my money, stripping my son of his birthright. It's fine, all
Yeah.
fine.
I think we can use Elizabeth Woodville as an example that a mother would not.
There we go.
How could you? It
And
is
even
their,
Margaret Beaufort. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
it's a mother looking after a child's birthright. It's acceptable.
Yeah. And we have to
But obviously, we
remember.
wouldn't find it acceptable now to go to war for it. But,
No.
we don't live in medieval England, so
We don't. And we are not of noble stock. So this is totally like we
will you
can't
stop
relate.
reminding me that I'm not in
Sir,
the nobility?
you forgot to
Please.
wear your tiara today.
I
If you were wearing,
know.
if you were one of these episodes, I'm just going to show up with my tiara. Except it doesn't work with my headphones. With my big old headphones, I can't wear both on my head at the same time. That's unfortunate.
We need to get you a new one that fits around your headphones.
You guys, I so badly want a crown or a nicer tiara. It was like my dream. I don't want to dress up in period costume. I just want a crown or a tiara,
They
okay?
do have some pretty that they're not outrageous. They do have some pretty little ones, like dainty ones in
Oh,
the
so I
Royal
could just
Palace
like wear
edition.
it like just right here. Just a
Yeah,
nice yeah, I
they're
think that
quite
would look.
cute.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to scenario three. Are you ready for scenario three?
Ready?
Okay. This one we're going to call victory at a cost.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
okay. How does this happen? Okay, so York becomes king after a decisive military victory. Margaret of Anjou refuses to concede. England faces continued war. Okay, so this reign would probably look like militarized court, heavy reliance on Yorkist loyalists, ruthless suppression of Lancastrians. So the outcomes for this might be short-term stability,
Mm-hmm.
long-term resentment,
Mm-hmm.
and Edward the Fourth raised as a warrior prince. And maybe like York becomes the very thing his supporters claimed he was not, a usurper by force. So this is troublesome to me. Nowhere there did I put whether or not Henry VI died, but I think it kind of implies that after a decisive military victory, maybe he did die, or he's locked up in the tower and they're gonna kill him.
Yeah, he's out the picture.
Yes. Okay, so do you think, gosh, do you think that would be the better route to go for Richard in this is by winning the crown through battle? I mean, I think we just kind of have to look to Henry Tudor as an
Yeah, I
example,
think,
maybe.
if he'd have won it in that way, you're still gonna have some of the uprisings that Henry Tudor faced.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be all peace after that. But having said that, I know I've already said this, but he did have powerful friends. And if you take Edward the Fourth's reign, yes, he had a few interruptions, shall we call them, but some of them were also down to his own friends and family.
Yeah. Yes, his brother.
Yeah. So I think if that was Richard of York, some of that wouldn't have happened because, you're not going to have Warwick arguing over who Richard of York marries because he's already married. That's
Yeah.
not going to happen. It would have been Richard's decision on who Edward the Fourth married. So
Yes.
again, that situation is taken away. And the same for the others, like George and Richard as well, younger Richard. All them would have been the responsibility of their father. No, nobody else's influence, other than Cecily, of course. But I think you take away some of them, but you'd replace them with others because the Lancastrian forces are never going to be completely quiet. Now, in my view, Edward the Fourth did a very good job of trying to eliminate a lot of that bad feeling by trying to, keep them on board, as you said in one of the earlier scenarios, like leave some of them in their positions,
Yeah.
or, there's marriages to think about, that kind of thing. All that was possible to try and eliminate some of the risk. But I don't think it would have been plain sailing. I think it could have been done, but I still think he would have faced some backlash It's just that the ones that Edward the Fourth faced would have been taken out of the situation and replaced with different ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
So,
the biggest difference in this one is the active accord had been passed. So Richard was already considered the heir. Why would he need
yeah.
a victory in battle to become
hmm
king when it was inevitable for him? Well, hopefully inevitable for him to become
But
king.
the
And
other thing would be where is Margaret and her son again? Because you've still got that
yeah,
risk there that is somebody gonna wait until the child's older, or even fight and put crown the baby and have Margaret as the regent, or one of
yeah,
the nobility as the regent, which means they get all the power. So that risk is still there,
yeah. I
unless they are also part of, what did you call it at the start? A decisive
dynastic slaughter.
dynastic slaughter, unless they are also victims of that,
Oh,
in
yikes.
which case I think a lot of the risk is eliminated then, and it'll just be a few that would have the Lancastrian loyalty. But I think Edward the Fourth did very well at bringing some of them around, and I think his father could have done the same thing,
I'm glad that you keep,
especially once Somerset was out the picture.
yeah. I'm glad that you keep coming back to Margaret of Anjou because clearly I've excluded her from my notes for some odd reason here. She is an important factor in this too. And like in this situation, my first thought was, well, if her husband maybe was killed in battle, she probably would have fled to exile. You know, she would have gone abroad with her son, where she could have raised support. If she had stayed in the country and was captured, maybe they would have separated her from her son. And then what would that have done? Would she been able to raise a rebellion against Richard if her son wasn't with her?
I think she'd find it very, like, obviously anything's possible, but I think she'd find it very, very difficult if her child was basically a ward of the crown,
Yeah,
because you've got, obviously they'd probably let her see him, but he's essentially going to be part of the king's household. Like, how are you going to raise a rebellion when your son is in the custody of the king?
right.
And then brought up alongside the king's obviously they were older than him, but you know what I mean, like he would have been around the king's children. Like, it creates another side of a relationship, doesn't it, that
Yeah,
Edward Edmund, because he would have still been alive,
that's true.
George, younger Richard, they might have treated him like a almost little brother. So yeah, I think you eliminate a lot of it if you separate them.
Wow.
And I think she'd find it very, very difficult to raise a rebellion if she didn't have custody of her son.
So far, this scenario is sounding like the best option, honestly.
For who?
And well, not for Margaret, not for Henry the
None of
Sixth.
them are sounding great for Margaret, to be honest.
Honestly, as the queen consort, there was, there wasn't much she could do. She tried. I mean, when we look at actual history, she really tried.
Yeah.
But what can you do if you don't have somebody to sit on the throne? Once her son
Yeah.
died, then it was kind of all over for her.
And I
So,
do feel for her, because, I think Margaret was of the view that women could rule. And it's only a few generations later that women prove they can.
yeah,
But back then, no, nobody wanted a woman to rule England. And I think that's a bit the sad side, that could she have done it? Who knows?
yeah,
Probably, but she was never given that chance. And then I think, she'd got part of the nobility on side, but that side obviously clashed with Richard, Duke of York. So it was never going to be plain sailing for her, whether she'd have got the regency or not,
yeah. It's
sadly.
seriously such a turbulent time in history. Okay, are you ready for the fourth scenario?
Okay.
This one's called A Bridge, Not a Dynasty. Okay,
Oh,
so how does this one happen, right? York is crowned. He reigns maybe 5 to 7 years. I think this is one you're gonna
Okay.
like. He dies naturally. Okay. What would follow? Obviously, his son Edward succeeds as Edward the Fourth. There's no rushed coronation because this is all legit. Edward is more cautious, less impulsive. Possibly no Woodville marriage. Possibly, a lot changes, right? So why is this powerful? York absorbs the worst of resistance. Edward inherits a calmer throne. York becomes remembered as a stabilizer, not a rebel. So really, the Wars of the Roses kind of just really shrinks in scope at this point. There's fewer noble lines wiped out.
Yeah.
So do you think the new Richard the Third's short reign, would that make his son Edward the Fourth's reign stronger or weaker? Or what's your take on this scenario, maybe?
I think stronger at first because, he didn't face, like, it wasn't all plain sailing for Edward, as we've already mentioned. He did have his own share of rebellions and things like that. I do think if his dad had reigned for a few years, Edward would have already been married. So I think the Woodville bit is out the picture anyway.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think, he would have been, by the time he became king, he would have had a queen with him. So I think that takes part of it. And Richard, Duke of York, wasn't stupid. I think he would have made sure that that was a good match. Possibly a Lancastrian
Hmm.
to, seal that rift a bit like later on when you've got Henry Tudor and Elizabeth of York kind of thing,
Yeah.
bring the two families together, or somebody from Europe that then brings an alliance that if Edward does need support, if there is an uprising, that support is there. So I think he might not have needed to work as hard at the start he wouldn't have had those fences to mend, so to speak, when he's trying to, make peace and forgive the Lancastrians to bring them on his side rather than fighting them all the time. But at the same time, I think he also got a lot of respect from his actions. Like he outright won. You can't deny that. But then his actions after that were not to go and slaughter all the Lancastrians. He tried to bring them on side, and I think he probably was respected by maybe they didn't like him, but you've got to show somebody respect that doesn't just slaughter you because you picked the wrong side or exile you and take all your lands. You haven't got an attainder against you. So I think that bit would have been taken away because he wouldn't have had to deal with it.
Yeah.
But he's still a young king. There's still that Lancastrian threat there. You just don't know how big it is. Like, is it happening behind the scenes? So I think he'd still have to be wary, but I think it'd be fairly peaceful, like that the Passover from his dad to him.
Yeah. Well, and of course I excluded Margaret of Anjou again. So I feel like in this situation with starting out with Richard being crowned, that would implicate that Henry VI died and the rightful crown went to the new Richard III. So Margaret would have been Dowager Queen.
Yeah.
She's still probably would have had a son,
Hmm.
and would she have stayed in England while who she probably saw as the usurper king ruled, and then his son took over.
I think you could, I think if she has access to her son, she's going to go. If she doesn't, I think she'd probably stay to try and, you know, get back in the presence of her son because no matter how you feel, you don't want to be living abroad whilst your son is in the custody of somebody else, do you? Like, no,
Mm.
nobody wants to do that. So I think she'd have a hard choice. But then I think it all boils down to what kind of rebellion would she even if she had her son in her possession, that sounds like it's a phone or something. Even if she's got her son, what kind of rebellion is she going to be able to raise when you've got a young, strong king on the throne that's
Yeah.
married to either a Lancastrian woman or a European princess versus your young child?
Yeah.
So I still, nothing's impossible. She still had supporters. There's no doubt about that. But, her last chance came from Warwick. And I think if you have Richard, Duke of York, as Richard III for, I think you said 5 to 7 years,
Yeah.
and then that passes to Edward IV, and the marriage bit is already gone because Dad's already decided who Edward's marrying or he's already married,
Yeah.
that whole bit with Warwick is gone. He's not gonna go and support Margaret.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think she'd find it very, very difficult.
I feel like all of these scenarios really have excluded the kingmaker, but he wasn't even like if he was called the kingmaker, he wasn't really necessary in any of these
Not if you've
scenarios.
got, if Richard is legally king in any way,
Yeah.
no, because it does pass to Edward, unless Richard suddenly decided that, I'm not bothered about my heirs. You can have Margaret's son as king after me, which I think that would cause even more upset than the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. You
I don't
think
think Edward the Fourth is going to sit there and go, "Okay, Dad, yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
we'll,
All
we'll see
good.
it done." No,
I
no,
don't
no,
think
no,
I
no.
don't think any of his sons would have been too keen on that.
No. So I don't think you're right. Would you even have the kingmaker?
Right?
Unless actually scenario three, if he is part of that dynastic slaughter,
You really like that.
you could I love that. You could probably give him a bit of that title that, his forces were needed by Richard of York. There's no doubt about that. He couldn't
Yeah.
have won the battles that he did without him. And the same with Edward. So, you could give him a bit of it, but realistically, he wouldn't have won the throne for Edward. Not that Edward didn't do anything for himself. I think, we're taking a bit of the credit away from Edward there. But yeah, I don't think you could really call him the kingmaker if Richard is king and then passes it to Edward.
Right. Yeah, he would have just been another powerful noble at court. It
Their
does make,
daughters probably would have appreciated more than what happened.
I was just gonna say, we need to talk about his daughters because their outcome probably would have been far different than it was. They
Yeah,
had,
and that marriage that he wanted for George and Isabel, would Richard of York approved that?
yeah,
Possibly.
right, yeah. And we haven't really talked about Cecily Neville in any of this either. Like, what would her involvement have been in all of this if like let's talk about the White Queen if she had not been okay like let's say see but that's the whole thing with this like in the White Queen she wasn't okay with Edward because he married Elizabeth Woodville
Mm.
if he had been married to somebody else a royal from another country she probably would have been fine with that, and there would have been no issues with her trying to put George on the throne or any
I
of that.
think you'd have an interesting situation if you've got Cecily as queen
Yeah.
and then you've still got Margaret around. So if they kept her in at the royal court, could you imagine if they made Margaret become part of Cecily's household? That's a bit awkward, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be
So,
awkward.
but it'd be quite entertaining to be a fly on the wall for that
Oh
situation.
my gosh.
Because,
Yeah.
from what I've read, both of them were very strong women. I
Yes.
can't see Margaret being very happy to be made to serve Cecily. So,
Anyone.
well, yeah, anyone,
She would
but
not.
especially the wife of the husband who's took your son's throne.
Yeah. Uh,
But interesting. But yeah, she might have been happier with who her son married. So,
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate that I was talking about the White Queen, not actual history. I was talking about historical
yes,
fiction.
the fiction.
Before anyone comes at me for my history being wrong, just saying what if in that scenario.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think if there hadn't been all of the battles that there were, would Edward the Fourth have even met Elizabeth Woodville? Would she have even crossed paths with him? Would that even been an option for him?
Possibly because I think if you're if you're making peace with the Lancastrians in some way, her her dad and her brothers, even, her sons when they grew up, they're going to be part of that royal household in one way or the other. Maybe not the actual inner circle, but they're going to be at court at some point.
True. True.
So it's possible that she would have met them in that way. And obviously, Elizabeth's mum wasn't a nobody.
Right.
So
Y-
the chances are, even if Elizabeth wasn't called to court to serve anyone, she probably would have been in the presence of her mom when, either visiting or whatever. So I think if you've got Jacquetta at the royal court, at some point her daughters are going to be there as well. So I think, yes, he would have met her, but by that point, I think he'd probably already be married.
Yeah. Maybe he would have tried to make her his mistress, like what was her name? Jane Shore.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah. But would
Then
Elizabeth
he
have
does
taken
try
him?
that in The White Queen,
Yeah, he does.
back to the fictionalized side.
I just, maybe it's because of the White Queen that I think Elizabeth Woodville would have never accepted being a mistress. She just seems like that kind of woman who would have been like, no, that's not
Well,
gonna
in The
happen.
White Queen, she pulls a dagger on Max Irons. Like,
I love that. Seriously, that series. She's so strong. Like it's how I imagine Elizabeth Woodville. Maybe that's why I love her so much because I picture her as Rebecca Ferguson.
possibly. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's who she was. She was going after what she wanted and,
And
she
that's
was
probably why I like Edward the Fourth.
yeah. I like sorry. I was like I'm gonna start fanning myself over here again. Max Irons is hot, okay? I'm sorry. If you guys have seen The White Queen, you will agree with us. I
Yeah.
hope, at least. I think so. Okay, last
Probably
scenario.
got some people going, ew, no.
I don't know. Stop listening. Don't ever listen to the show again.
Yeah, sorry, not sorry.
If you don't agree with us on this, you must leave. Okay, let's go through scenario 5. We have a few minutes to go here still. Scenario 5. This one we're going to call too late, too divided. So this one plays out like this. York is crowned, but opposition remains strong. When we say opposition,
Okay.
Margaret regroups. Yes, see Margaret's in this one. But
Margaret's in this one. Okay.
Northern England never fully submits. So what happens next? Fragmented authority, regional power struggles. England drifts towards semi-feudal conflict zones. Worst case outcome. York is deposed. Yorkists cause collapses altogether. Edward the Fourth dies young or never reigns. So like this scenario kind of reminds us like becoming king
Don't
that
like this
that
scenario.
doesn't guarantee control. So this one everything basically blows up for Richard, kind of like in reality. Like it
But I
he,
don't like the bit about Edward dying.
oh, sorry, should I here, I'll take that. I'll take that out of here. Let's rewind this. I mean, obviously in this situation, there is going to be conflict. You know,
Hmm.
there's opposition, there's going to be battles. So it would be
Yeah.
possible that Edward could die,
Yeah, of
which
course.
which is interesting because then that would leave his younger brother Edmund, and then maybe we'd
Yeah.
end up with a new king that we Edmund the
It's
first
an
would.
interesting thought because we don't know much about Edmund.
Yeah.
Like, we know what George Duke of Clarence was like.
Yes.
We know what Richard of Gloucester was like. We know little about Edmund. Now, this is probably just me being weird, but Edmund was only a year younger than Edward. So I like to think that he was more along the lines of Edward than the younger ones, because obviously there is, a few year age gap between Edward and George. And then Richard was obviously 10 years younger than Edward. So
Yeah.
I think Edward and Edmund, God,
Yeah.
would have probably spent much more time together than Edmund and the younger two. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was a little more like Edward than George.
Yeah. And he was the second son, right? So when we look at that, he knew he wasn't going to inherit his father's stuff. He
And
had
he
this.
still fought by his side.
Yes. Yes, he
But he
did.
was he wasn't old when he died. I think he was what, 15, 16.
I don't even remember. He was young.
It's
Wait,
quite sad.
well, yes, fighting in battles when you're
Although
still a
to be fair, you
teenager.
could say the same about Edward of Westminster, Margaret's son. He was what,
That's true.
15, 16 when he died as well. So it's completely insane for us now to think about 15, 16-year-old boys fighting a bloody war.
You know, you just brought this up and it just made me go back to Anne Neville because I feel like she has been a non-topic in this thing for the most part. She was married to Edward. Jeez, there's
Too
just
many Eds.
did I just call him Edwin?
Good old Edmund.
Like
Maybe
combining
that's what we call him to differentiate because there's too many Ed names.
there's Edward, there's Edmund, and there's Edwin.
Edwind.
Oh my gosh. Okay, anyway, Anne Neville was married to him
Yeah,
and then he was killed in battle. So
yeah.
in this alternate universe, Anne Neville's history completely changes. She wouldn't have become queen. She wasn't married to um Edwin of Westminster. Like, yeah, it does make me wonder what would have happened to her and her sister had Richard.
Maybe they'd have married George and Richard anyway.
Hmm.
Like, who knows?
I
Maybe
guess,
that would have been the perfect solution. Because obviously, we know Edward didn't agree to the George Isabel
yeah,
marriage.
yeah,
But if Richard, Duke of York, as Richard the Third, is on the throne, would those marriages have been arranged before he died or even happened before he died? Who knows what that would have
yeah,
been? Because would he have, in a way, owed as much to Warwick as Edward is implied to owe him?
yeah,
Or
right.
would he have married his sons to European duchesses, princesses? He could have done because then, send them off into Europe. They've got,
Yeah.
they would have been royal princes
Oh
then.
man.
So, send them off. They could have been dukes elsewhere, maybe even a king at some point, but I don't know. I think. Life would have probably been kinder to Anne Neville.
Yeah.
And Isabel, for that matter, because I
Yeah.
feel for her.
Yes. Her story is so
It's
tragic.
very sad, her story.
It is. Well, I think one of the things that, as we wrap up here, one of the things that I want to look at too is there any scenario with the new Richard, Richard III, becoming king that the Tudors could still possibly happen? Because he's got all these sons, he's got heirs. And if they get married and have children, is there even a possibility for Henry Tudor to come in and win at a battle? Like what?
Well, possibly because, if Richard is king, then Henry wouldn't be in exile.
Good point.
So, although you might not have the Edward Woodville marriage, which kind of, takes away, well, it doesn't really take away Elizabeth of York. She just would have had a different mother, possibly.
Yeah,
Could Henry have still married that daughter? Of course he could, because he still would have been, someone. He still had good heritage. He wasn't just a complete nobody.
right.
So, and Margaret Beaufort was smart. I don't think she'd have been happy with her son marrying a nobody. So I think she still would have tried to seek an advantageous marriage for her son. Would he have become king? Probably not, because I think you've got all of those sons to take out the mix first. But could he have had a good life? Yes,
Yeah.
without exile as well. Would that have been better? I don't know, because then you're right, we are missing the whole Tudor thing.
It's
But
gone. And the Plantagenets could have ruled 6 centuries instead of three, like
yeah,
who knows? Okay,
yeah.
so we have come to the final question. This is every episode so far. I think we've ended with a question that I make you answer.
Always feel like you save like the hardest question to last
This
and
one's
put me
this
on the
one
spot.
this one I'm gonna make. This is a close-ended question, so you have to answer with a yes or no. I don't want you.
God. Okay.
And I can already imagine she's going to sit there and she's really going to think about this, and there's going to be silence as she's determining whether or not this is a yes or a no. Okay.
Yeah, so for anyone listening, we haven't gotten anywhere. It's just the wheels spinning in my head.
If you hear me laughing, that's because Amy is staring at me blankly. Okay, here is the final question. If you had to choose, would you rather live in England under King Richard of York or under Edward IV as he actually was? So not really a yes or a no, but which king would you have rather lived under?
See, my first thought,
Nope, stop.
um, Richard,
Oh, okay. Now I want you to explain.
because I value my life. But my first thought was Edward, because Max Irons.
I knew it. I knew it. I thought immediately you were just going to say Max Irons.
First thought that popped in my head, I was like, that's a stupid question. Of course, Edward. But then I thought, well, there's no guarantee I'd actually live. So
Yeah.
if Richard is there, it's probably going to be more peaceful. So I might actually live to meet Max Irons. So we'll go that route.
I love so Max Irons and Ever the Fourth are now interchangeable, just like Charles Brandon and
Yes.
Henry Cavill are
Yeah.
interchangeable. So Max Irons is the Henry Cavill of Off the Record. I'm going forward. You know what,
Need a
Amy?
need a new t-shirt now.
Yes, yeah, I'll have to come up with something here. But
Maybe,
Amy,
maybe we could have Henry Cavill and Max Lyons on the same t-shirt.
I'm sure that would cost me a lot of money to be able to put their faces on t-shirts. I feel like I'm already gonna get in enough trouble with Henry Cavill's lawyers. Well, Amy, this was such a fun episode. I felt like I know, and you guys don't see what happens behind the scenes, but this episode made me really nervous because I feel like I don't really know a whole lot about this. What I do know is historical fiction and film and all of that. But Amy, you really carried this episode, so thank you for that.
No, my pleasure. I think we should do some historical fiction
Oh,
episodes.
I think that would be
I think
fun.
people need to tell us, would they enjoy that?
Yes, I think
And
so
if
too.
so, which ones? Because obviously we've talked about the White Queen today.
Yes.
There are other ones that we may or may not have guiltily watched,
Uh,
read
Probably all of them.
many times.
You know? Yeah, maybe one that's not the Tudors because the Tudors had so many seasons. I've thought about this too. I was like, if we do the Tudors, we'd have to focus on like one season because it would take forever to go through and watch all of those again to be able
Yeah,
to point out inaccuracies or stuff like that.
yeah.
But I think next week we should do another what if because it's people are loving it and we have so many suggestions to be able to go through.
Yes. Keep the
So,
suggestions coming though.
yes, please do. But until next week, Amy, thank you so much.
My pleasure. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to Off the Record on Tudors Dynasty and Beyond. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're following the podcast. And if you'd like to support the work that goes into researching and creating these episodes, you can find extra content and ways to join the community through Patreon and Substack. And don't forget, you can now comment directly on episodes over on Spotify. I love reading every single one. Until next time, stay curious, and I'll see you back here for more royal drama and real history.